Let me describe a situation. It's one that I've seen play out in different ways over many, many years. And I suspect it's a situation you might recognize too. You've been with your company for a good while. You're reliable, you do quality work consistently. By any objective measure, you are a loyal, valued member of the team. Then a new person joins. They seem sharp, they're eager, and you're asked to get them up to speed. So you do. You share your knowledge, the processes, all those unwritten rules you had to learn the hard way. You're actually investing your time to make them successful. And then you find out. Maybe it's a quiet conversation, maybe it's a document left on the printer by mistake. You discover that their starting salary is higher than what you make right now, after all your years of service. It's a really difficult feeling, isn't it? It's a mix of anger, confusion, maybe even a sense of betrayal. We need to talk about why this happens, not to excuse it, but to really understand the mechanics at work here. Because you see, understanding the system is the only way you can effectively protect your career within it. So the first reason this happens has nothing to do with you personally. It's not about your manager or even your specific company. It's about the external market and its cold logic. You have to realize that your annual raise and their starting offer are calculated in two completely different universes. Your raise, well, that's an internal calculation. It's usually a small percentage tied to a fixed budget, and it's always anchored to what you were paid last year. Their offer, on the other hand, is a market transaction. It is the price right now to get a specific skill for an urgent business problem. You're simply not playing the same game. Now, this is a hard truth to accept. Companies genuinely do value loyalty for things like retention and culture. But when it comes to compensation, the main driver is market rate at the precise moment of a transaction. An external hire is a new transaction. Your annual raise? Well, it's not. Okay, so let's move from the outside market to what's happening inside the company's walls. Because even when a manager wants to fix this imbalance, the system itself often gets in the way. You know, there's a formal name for this whole phenomenon. HR departments call it salary compression. It is a known issue in pretty much every large organization, and it's a direct result of internal policies and how budgets work. So here's how it really works. The company sets aside a fixed pool of money for raises. We're talking maybe 3-4%. That has to be spread across the entire team. Your role is probably locked into a rigid salary band with a set ceiling. To get you a significant raise that breaks those rules, it takes levels of approval most managers just can't get. It is almost always easier to get approval for a new hire at the market rate than it is to fight that internal bureaucracy for a big adjustment for a current employee. And right there, that's the heart of the internal problem. From a budgeting standpoint, the money for a new hire's salary and the money for your raise often come from two different pots. A new hire is seen as a strategic investment. A large raise for you is often seen as an off-cycle exceptional expense. The system is built for acquisition. It's not always built for equitable retention. So you've got the external market forces and the internal company systems. Neither of them is personal. They are both structural. And recognizing that, really internalizing it, well, that's not defeat. That's the beginning of a real strategy. That feeling of being cheated is, of course, personal, and it's a valid feeling. But the forces causing it are not. They are just the predictable outcomes of impersonal economic and bureaucratic systems doing what they do. Separating that personal feeling from the structural cause is probably the most important step you can take. It lets you move from raw emotion to clear-eyed analysis. It allows you to see the entire board so you can decide on your next move. This really requires a fundamental shift in your professional outlook. It means moving away from a passive hope that your loyalty will eventually be rewarded financially, and moving towards understanding and then building your own leverage. Now, leverage isn't about making threats or giving ultimatums. It is about a quiet confidence that's based on your real-world value. And that whole process begins with one non-negotiable action. You must always know what your current market value is. Not what you made last year, not what your coworker makes, but what another company would pay for your exact skills today. This knowledge, this is the foundation of your career's financial health. It is your data in a world that runs on it. Learning about these mechanics, it can feel a little cynical. I get that. It takes some of the magic away, but it replaces that magic with clarity. It does hurt to realize that loyalty alone doesn't set your pay,
But doesn't that knowledge, once you truly have it, become a form of protection, a tool that allows you to navigate the rest of your career with your eyes wide open? Let me walk you through a scenario. It's one I've seen play out time and time again. It's a quiet story, really, one that happens in the background between all the meetings and the deadlines. And it almost always starts with time.
Think about that. 5, maybe 7 years. That's a really significant chunk of your career to dedicate to one organization, right? It's more than enough time to master a role, to build deep relationships, and to really invest a part of yourself in the company's future. So, at the heart of this whole thing, you have a loyal employee. You know the type. They're the one with all that institutional knowledge. They understand the unspoken rules, how things really get done behind the scenes. They're basically the pillar of the team. Totally reliable, committed, trusted. And so, what happens? A new person joins the team. And who gets asked to train them? Of course, it's our loyal employee. And they do it. They generously share their expertise, they open up their network, they invest their own time to make sure this new colleague can succeed. They're doing exactly what a good team player, what the organization expects. And then it happens. The discovery. And look, this is almost never some big dramatic confrontation. It's usually quiet, accidental. A document left on a printer, a casual chat in the kitchen, maybe a shared screen in a virtual meeting at just the wrong second. And in that moment, the loyal employee learns that the new person, the one they just finished training, earns more than they do. Now, before we go any further, I want you to just pause here for a second. Put yourself in that situation, in that quiet, jarring moment of discovery. What's the very first feeling that comes up for you? Just notice it. Don't judge it, just notice it. Okay, that feeling, whatever it was for you, that's where the real cost kicks in. We're talking about emotional damage. It's this quiet internal cost that you'll never ever see on a balance sheet, but believe me, it has a profound impact on an organization. You know, for most people, it shows up in a few very specific ways. First, there's this deep, sinking feeling of being undervalued. All those years of dedication, all that expertise, it suddenly feels like it's been discounted. Then comes a sense of betrayal. And it's not usually about a single person. It's a feeling of being let down by the organization itself. And finally, and this is pretty much inevitable, comes the loss of motivation. That extra effort, the willingness to go the extra mile, it just starts to fade. And really, why wouldn't it? There's a fundamental truth about the world of work that we often ignore until it's far too late. And it's this: nothing kills loyalty faster than unfair pay. Just let that sink in for a moment. Now, this is the exact point where bitterness can really take root. It's so easy to get stuck in that feeling, but what I want to do is shift our perspective. Let's try to move away from the personal hurt and toward a more strategic understanding. This isn't about assigning blame. It's about finding clarity. Okay, so the first thing to grasp, and honestly, this is often the hardest part to truly accept, is that in the vast majority of these situations, it's rarely personal. It's not some intentional slight against you or the quality of your work. What it is instead is systemic. It's a classic case of what we call salary compression. See, the budgets for hiring new people are often completely disconnected from the budgets for retaining existing staff. The market rate for new talent goes up and up, but the small yearly raises given to loyal employees, well, they just can't keep pace. The system itself, just by running on autopilot, is what creates these unfair pay gaps. And all of this brings us to the most important question of all. It's one I'm going to leave with you. If we can accept that it's the system and not a specific person that created this situation, what does that change about how you view your own story? And maybe even more importantly, what does that newfound clarity empower you to do next? Let me describe a situation, one you may recognize. It's that quiet, sinking feeling you get the moment you find out a new colleague, someone with less experience than you, is earning significantly more money. Maybe you've been there yourself, or perhaps you've heard the story, whispered in confidence, from someone you trust. You see, someone is brought in from the outside, and they're brought in at a pay grade that seems, well, completely disconnected from the reality inside the company. And that is the part that stings, because it feels personal, doesn't it? So let's talk about where the mind immediately goes in a situation like this.
It's a very human and a very understandable reaction. Instantly, you feel overlooked. You feel undervalued. After all those years of hard work, it can even feel a bit like a betrayal. And this is the thought that really cements that feeling. A sense that your commitment, your dedication, has just been taken for granted. Now, that feeling is perfectly valid. But the conclusion, well, the conclusion is based on a misunderstanding of the system you're in. So, for a moment, let's set the emotion aside. Let's look at this from the cold, dispassionate perspective of the business itself. Because this isn't about feelings, it's about mechanics. Look at this. This really illustrates two completely separate parallel realities. On one side, you have your salary. It tends to move slowly, right? Small, incremental increases tied to those annual budget cycles and your past performance reviews. But a new hire salary, that moves at the speed of the current market. It's driven by the urgent need to fill a critical role. And most importantly, it's based on what it costs to attract someone away from a competitor. You see, they're simply not playing the same game. The entire system is driven by these separate forces. The outside market dictates the price for new talent. Your compensation, on the other hand, is constrained by an internal budget that was probably set a year ago. It's not a judgment on your value, it's just a reflection of how this system is designed. I want you to let that sink in for a moment. This is one of the hardest, most unspoken truths of corporate life. An organization will pay what it absolutely must to solve an immediate, urgent problem, like a critical position sitting empty. Loyalty is appreciated, of course, but urgency is what gets the budget. Once you understand this, it allows you to reframe the entire situation. It helps you shift the narrative away from a personal insult and toward a more strategic understanding of the environment you're operating in. The decision to hire someone at the current market rate, it wasn't about you. And it wasn't meant to signal that your contributions aren't valued. It was just a transactional response to a business need. This is simply the system operating exactly as it was designed to. It's cold, it's efficient, and it's impersonal. So when you strip away the emotion, when you see the underlying logic, it brings you to this question. If the action wasn't personal, then an emotional reaction is probably not going to be very effective. The real challenge isn't to get angry at the game, it's to understand the rules. Because once you truly understand how the system values and pays for urgency over loyalty, you can start to think about how to make that system work for you.
Let me describe a situation, one you might recognize. It's late in the evening, you're probably the last one still working, putting the final touches on a project, making sure every single detail is just right. You have a deep-seated belief in the quality of your work, and you trust that it will speak for itself. But there's also that quiet, nagging feeling that your dedication isn't really being seen, or at least not valued in the same way it is for others who seem to get by with a lot less effort. You know that feeling, that quiet frustration? It comes from a fundamental disconnect. It's the gap between the rules you were taught, work hard, do great work, and the rewards will come, and the unspoken rules that are actually at play. This isn't about you failing. It's about a failure to see the system for what it is.
And believe me, this disconnect, it has a cost. It's not a one-time thing either. It's an expense that compounds over an entire career. It shows up in missed promotions and a salary that just never seems to keep up, and eventually in a growing feeling of disillusionment. This is the very high and very unspoken cost of professional silence.
Now, over the years, I've seen so many talented professionals make the same understandable mistakes when they get this feeling. They end up treating the symptom, that feeling of being undervalued, but they never actually get to the root cause. Let's walk through a few of the most common ones. The first one is simply assuming the system is fair. It's this belief that a well-run company is a meritocracy, where great work gets noticed, properly evaluated, and rewarded, almost automatically. But here's the truth. A company isn't a meritocracy. It's a structure, and structures don't run on fairness. They run on procedures, on explicit communication. Your excellent work is an important input, yes, but it is not the only input that matters. The second misdiagnosis is emotional loyalty. You pour yourself into the company's mission, you feel like you belong, and you naturally expect that loyalty to be returned in kind. But a company's relationship with you isn't emotional, it's contractual. The system values your output, and it values your compliance, not your feelings. It's an uneven relationship,
And to act like it's a balanced one, well, that's a strategic error. And then there's the big one, avoiding any talk about compensation. So many of us are brought up to believe it's rude or maybe even greedy to talk about money. But that cultural discomfort you feel, it directly benefits a system that has absolutely no incentive to fix pay gaps on its own. Your manager's job is to manage a budget. From a purely procedural point of view, your quiet, unaddressed salary gap just means the budget is being managed very successfully.
All of these mistakes, they lead to the most damaging error of all, just staying silent. Your silence isn't seen as focus. It's not interpreted as you being patient or dedicated. No. In the cold logic of the system you're in, your silence means something else entirely.
And it is absolutely crucial that you understand this. The system isn't malicious. It isn't personal. It just operates on its own logic. It responds to clear, direct signals and documented requests. It's designed for efficiency, for predictability. It is not designed to read your mind. So to navigate it, you have to learn its language.
This is the core principle. Just let that sink in for a moment. From your manager's perspective, which is the system's perspective, no news is good news. The absence of a formal request, or a negotiation, or a complaint, is taken as your consent. It's a signal that the current arrangement, your job, your pay, your responsibilities, is acceptable to you. Let's be really clear about this difference. You think your silence is showing your commitment to the work. The system, however, just registers your silence as a piece of data. And that data point simply reads, status quo, acceptable, no action required. A manager who's looking after a team of 10, 20, maybe 50 people, they are not proactively looking for unspoken problems to solve. They are responding to the problems that are explicitly brought to their attention. So once you understand this logic, that the system isn't personal, that it runs on signals, and that your silence is read as acceptance, that is the first vital step. It moves you away from a position of hope and into a position of clarity. And from that newfound clarity, a new question has to emerge.
This isn't a question that I can answer for you. It's the question you must begin to ask yourself, consistently. It is the very foundation of a strategic career. From this point on, every choice you make should be a deliberate answer to this question, not an action based on wishful thinking, but a calculated response from a position of real understanding. This is how you start to take back control.
I want you to picture a situation, one you've probably been in before. There's a meeting on your calendar, a compensation review, and in the days leading up to it, you start to feel that familiar knot of anxiety. You're rehearsing lines in your head, thinking about all the late nights, the extra projects, all the effort you've put in. You feel you deserve more. The whole thing just feels uncomfortable.
And that discomfort, it almost always leads us into a flawed conversation. We anchor our entire case on this idea of fairness, a concept that feels right but is fundamentally misunderstood in this kind of setting.
Just take a moment and think about that. Why does this specific interaction carry so much weight, so much anxiety? It's because the stakes, they feel incredibly personal. You see, at the very core of this discomfort is a belief that many of us hold quite deeply. It's this idea that our dedication, our loyalty, our sheer effort, it should be obvious, that the company should see it and reward it without us ever having to ask. It's a noble thought, for sure, but it is not how the system is actually designed to work. So, to navigate this successfully, we have to completely reframe the entire interaction. We have to move away from our personal feelings about our work and move toward an objective understanding of our position in the marketplace.
So if it's not about rewarding your effort or about being fair to you as a person, then what's really happening in that room? What is the actual transaction taking place?
And this is the crucial point. Let that just sit for a moment. This is not a plea for recognition. It is a business discussion about the market price for the value you deliver. Nothing more and nothing less.
Look, this is one of those unspoken truths of corporate life. The system isn't sentimental. It's an economic engine. It doesn't have a way to measure your effort. It's built to measure your output and what it would cost to replace that output. Once you truly accept that, you can stop taking the process so personally and start treating it strategically.
So, how do you prepare for a business discussion about your value? Well, you build a business case. Think of it as a strategic framework built on 5 essential pillars. This isn't just a list of tips. This is the very foundation of your entire argument.
All right, let's walk through this framework. First, you absolutely must know your market value. You have to understand your objective price before you even think about having this discussion. Next, track your impact. This means keeping a running log of your quantifiable achievements. Then, you time the conversation. This has to be a strategic decision, not an emotional one. After that, you use external benchmarks to ground your request in market reality. And finally, you speak with data. Use facts, use figures, and you remove all subjectivity from the conversation.
Now, building the case, that's only half of it. Presenting it correctly requires a fundamental shift in the language you use. You have to consciously remove the emotion, the drama, the personal feelings, and replace it all with cold, hard data.
Just look at the contrast in power here. The emotion-led approach says things like, "I feel I deserve more," or "I've worked so hard." Frankly, those statements are easy to dismiss because they're about your feelings. The data-led approach sounds like this: "Based on current market roles with these responsibilities," or "My responsibilities now align with the senior-level job description." You see the difference? These aren't feelings, they're facts, and facts are much, much harder to ignore.
Think about it from your manager's perspective. They can't take a case built on your feelings to their boss or to the finance department, but they can take a case built on evidence. When you do this, you're not putting them in a difficult position. You're actually giving them the exact tools they need to advocate for you. You're making it easy for them to say yes.
Okay, let's zoom out. Because this single conversation, as important as it is just one part of a much bigger career strategy. The goal isn't just to win one negotiation, it's to manage your value over the entire course of your professional life.
And that right there requires a real mindset shift. Managing your value is not a one-time event you gear up for. It's a professional discipline, just like any other. It's a quiet, continuous process of tracking, benchmarking, and understanding your position in the market. It happens all year, not just in the few weeks before a review.
And that brings us to the final, and maybe the most important concept of all: strategic patience. Sometimes the data will tell you that the timing is wrong. Sometimes, despite an excellent case, the answer will be no. That is not a failure. It is simply more data for you to use. The goal isn't to win every single batter. It's to thoughtfully and patiently manage your career for the long term. That is how you truly protect and grow your value.
Let me describe a situation that you may recognize. A dedicated, valuable employee has been with a company for several years. They perform well, they're trusted. And then one day, a new person is hired onto their team. This new hire has less direct experience, and yet the loyal employee learns they've been brought in at a salary level that took them years of small, incremental raises to reach. That feeling? It's familiar to many. And it leads to a difficult and often unspoken question. Why does loyalty so often feel like a financial liability in a corporate environment? It's a feeling many professionals just suppress, but it's a valid and really important question to examine. The answer, you'll find, is not personal. It's systemic. This whole phenomenon is something we can call the loyalty trap. It's a situation where your value to the company, all that institutional knowledge, your relationships, your reliability, it grows far more quickly than your compensation does. You become more and more essential on the inside, while your salary falls further and further behind the external market. Now, to really understand this, we have to accept a fundamental disconnect. Your internal value is based on what you know about the company. Your salary, however, that's determined by an external market that values your transportable skills. You see, companies pay to solve problems. Loyal employees solve problems using deep internal context. New hires, well, they're paid the current market rate to solve those same problems with fresh skills. The two are simply priced differently. This brings us to the single most effective tool for realigning your salary with your actual market value. I call it the reset button. Changing companies, it's the main way professionals force a recalibration of their worth. It's not about being disloyal. It's about responding to the basic mechanics of the market. Now, of course, there are trade-offs. On one hand, staying offers comfort, familiarity, the political capital you've already built up. And on the other hand, switching offers a higher salary, new challenges, a fresh start. These are the obvious things we all weigh. But the most important factor is actually hidden. And here is that hidden mechanic. When you stay, your raises are typically small percentages, right? They're constrained by internal salary bands and budgets. You're basically moving incrementally inside a predefined box. But when you switch, your entire compensation baseline gets reset to the current external market rate. You're not just getting a raise, you are getting a complete reevaluation from scratch. reset. That one action, it bypasses years of slow, capped increases. It's the market's natural response to the internal inertia that creates the loyalty trap in the first place. It is a powerful and sometimes necessary financial tool. So, what if you choose to stay? What are the real consequences of not pressing that reset button? The truth is, staying isn't a passive act. There is a very real, very tangible cost to it if you're not strategic. Maintaining your market value while staying at a single company is an active process. It requires consistent, evidence-based negotiation. It is not your manager's primary job to make sure you're paid at market rate. It's yours. And being passive here is perhaps the most expensive financial mistake you can make over the course of an entire career. If you do choose to stay and grow, there's a simple formula for protecting your income. It's skills plus visibility. Having valuable skills, that's just the baseline. That's the entry fee. But those skills have to be made visible to leadership, to the people who actually make the compensation decisions. If your value isn't seen, it can't be rewarded. I want you to just pause on that word for a moment. Visible. How visible are your contributions really? Does the person who signs your checks, the person who approves the budget, do they truly understand the value you create? If the answer is anything less than a clear yes, then your income is not protected. This all requires a pretty significant shift in your mindset. You have to stop thinking about your salary as something that is given to you and start thinking of it as the price for your services on an open market. Ask yourself this single, critical question. What would it cost my company in salary to hire someone from the outside to do my exact job today? That number, that is your true market value. It's the most important piece of data in your entire compensation strategy because it removes all the emotion and replaces it with cold, economic reality. So this brings us to a much healthier, much more effective definition of loyalty in the modern workplace. It is not unconditional. It has to be strategic. Strategic loyalty is a two-way exchange. It's that simple. You provide immense value, commitment, and expertise. In return, the company provides opportunity, growth, and fair market compensation. When one side of that equation starts to falter, a strategic professional has to reevaluate the entire arrangement. It isn't personal, it's just business. At the end of the day, your career path and your long-term earnings are simply the result of a series of strategic decisions. Staying, leaving, negotiating, these are all choices you actively make. They are not events that just happen to you. Because here is the fundamental truth of corporate compensation. If you don't know your market value, someone else will decide it for you. And they will always, always decide it in their favor, not yours. Taking control is the only logical response, and that starts with knowing your number, your replacement cost. That's the real starting point for any effective career strategy. Because a career should be built with strategy, not with hope.